Hi, my name is Trinity, and welcome to Kids Talk Church History, a one-of-a-kind podcast where kids investigate the history of the church. Over 2,000 years ago, Jesus said, "I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it." Has he kept his promise? How has Jesus built and preserved his church against all odds? Come with us on a trip through church history to find the answer, here on Kids Talk Church History. We're entering the 18th century, a time of revivals and new challenges for the church. We're going to start off with a small but lively region of Britain called Wales. Stay with us as we discover what God did in that part of the world, here on Kids Talk Church History. I'm Trinity. I am 17 and I live in Charleston, South Carolina.
I am Grace. I am 13 and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina.
My name is Sean. I'm 13 and I live in Augusta, Kansas.
I think this is the first time we've used the word revival in our podcast. Can you explain it for our listeners?
Yeah, I'm actually going to read a definition here from Simonetta Carr's church history book. It says that a religious revival is a time when God's Spirit seemed to work in an extraordinary way to bring a group of people to greater commitment to God. There were different revivals in the 18th century, but we'll start with the one in Wales because it seemed to have happened a little earlier than the one in England.
We don't hear so much about Wales. I've heard about the Prince of Wales, who is the heir to the throne of England.
I know that Tolkien loved the Welsh language. I looked it up and it seems very difficult to read.
Yeah, and I think that's why Tolkien liked it. He liked languages that sounded strange and mysterious.
For our younger listeners, that's J.R.R. Tolkien, the author of The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. He was English, but he learned Welsh.
Okay, but back to the revival. I've read that it started with two young preachers, Daniel Rowland and Howell Harris. Because of their strict discipline and their emphasis on personal faith, they were called Methodists, which sounds very similar to the word methodical.
So is that how the Methodist Church started?
Not really. At that time, the word Methodist was used a bit offensively, like telling someone that they're picky or fussy. Although these teachers wouldn't really have agreed with everything that the Methodists believe today. They were faithful to the Reformed confessions, like the Westminster Standards and the three forms of unity that we mentioned in other episodes. Also, they didn't start a new denomination. I think they were still part of the Church of England, but we can ask our guest about it later on.
That's really interesting. I read a little bit about the Welsh Revival. I think the most famous person in that revival was a 15-year-old girl named Mary Jones. She was so poor that she had to save money for 6 years to buy a Bible. And then she walked 26 miles to get a copy from a preacher that was selling them.
Yeah, I've read about her too. She became very famous, but I read that she walked for 26 miles on other occasions as well. She went to a church in Bala at other times, which is where she bought the Bible. In her old age, she said she walked all Saturday night so that she could be there on time for church on Sunday.
That sounds dangerous.
Did she walk alone?
I don't think so, but we'll have to ask our expert. But I think there are many groups of people walking together.
Man, we're kind of spoiled just getting into our cars on Sunday morning.
Yeah, and we have plenty of Bibles. I think in our house, we have maybe 5 to 6 copies.
Yeah, same for us. And I've read about other people from the Welsh Revival as well, like William Williams, which is a great name, by the way. He wrote the hymn, "Guide Me, O Thou Great Jehovah." I remember singing it often when we were in a Reformed church, and I just didn't know who wrote it. And now I can appreciate it even more because I can imagine the people singing the song on their walks.
And I heard a little bit of Welsh on YouTube. I looked up the Welsh words once I did some more research, but there was no way I could read them correctly.
One of my friend's grandparents, they're actually Welsh and they have a Welsh accent. And I'm also pretty sure that they can speak Welsh. So that's pretty interesting. But I read that William Williams wrote over 800 hymns.
I think writing new hymns was very common to various revivals.
Yeah, in the Lutheran tradition, many hymns were written by pietists. We mentioned them in a previous episode.
And then there was a poetess who wrote hymns in Welsh, Anne Griffiths. But I read that she didn't really write them down. She created them and then someone wrote them down for her.
I think there are lots of fascinating stories about the Welsh Revival, so much to read and to learn. We have a wonderful guest to tell us more about this. But first, we received 2 listeners' emails, so I'd like to answer those. One is from 7-year-old Marta from Boise, Idaho. She asked, "Do people still believe in purgatory?" And the answer is yes, especially in the Roman Catholic Church. We talked about in episode 30 with Dr. Leonardo Di Sicrio. If you go to our website, Marta, you can listen to that episode. Thank you for writing. Keep sending us questions. And the second letter is from Adam. I assume he's related to Marta because they have the same last name, and they're both from Boise, Idaho. Adam is 7, and he asked, who were the first missionaries to China? Adam, we're going to direct you to one of our earliest episodes too, because I don't specifically remember their names. Episode 21. It's a fascinating story, and I hope you like it. And do write it to us again. We always love hearing from you. And now let's turn to our guest, Dr. Wyn James, who's going to tell us about the Welsh Revival of the 18th century. Dr. James is a professor emeritus in the School of Welsh at Cardiff University and has written some books that look very interesting, at least from their covers, but they're mostly written in Welsh. Dr. James, we're so glad to have you join us today.
Nice to be with you.
All right. And so you heard us talk about the Welsh Revival. We're trying to sum it up very quickly. Do you have anything to add, or maybe some things that we got wrong about our quick summary?
No, you seem to have done quite a lot of homework and made a lot of interesting and valid points. I think what you need to remember, I think, when you're talking about the Welsh Revival, is that actually we're talking about a series of revivals. So we're talking about different, for example, when you're talking about Hywel Harris and Daniel Rowland, the leaders of the beginnings of the revival in the 1730s. They were a generation before Mary Jones was walking to Bala, and they were in South Wales and she was in North Wales. So, there is one thing that's true of Wales in the period from about 1730 through to the end of the 19th century, really. It became nicknamed the Land of Revival because these revivals that you were talking about were happening on a fairly regular basis. There were about 15 major revivals during that period, and then a lot of local revivals or spiritual awakenings. As you rightly say, it started in Wales. Prior to it starting in England, when you think of England, you think of the Charles Wesley and John Wesley and George Whitefield. They were more or less contemporaries with Hywel Harris and Daniel Rowland. And you've got to remember as well, these were all young people like you, really. Someone like Williams Pantycelyn, when he was converted, William Williams of Pantycelyn, he was in his late teens. Hywel Harris, and we always think they're always called the Methodist fathers in Wales, but actually they were young men in their early 20s and late teens, and we've got to remember that as well, as it's a youth movement in that period.
Yeah, so you mentioned that there are numerous Welsh revivals. Why is this first Welsh revival that happened in the 18th century so important?
Well, it's really because it starts the whole process. If you think of Wales, and I don't know how many of you actually know of Wales or have been to Wales, but we're a little land that sticks out from, if you think of the island of Britain. When I speak to American friends, they either know a lot about Wales because their family have come from there. You mentioned Grace said that she knew people that spoke Welsh, etc. So they either know a lot about Wales or they know virtually nothing. So what I tend to tell people is, well, you know where England is? Yes. They say, you know where Scotland is? Yes. They say, you know where Ireland is? Yes. They say, well, Wales is a little promontory on the island of Britain that's in between the three, inside the triangle, that triangle, if you like. And it's a small mountainous country. In the period we're talking about now, it was a very rural country. It was a country with a fairly very few towns, and it was only about 500,000 people living in there, less than 500,000 people. So it was quite a small population. Wales changes dramatically in the 19th century then, because it becomes very industrialized. But in this earlier period of revival, we're talking about a small population in a rural country. And what we see with these revivals is, and why the first one, which we call the Methodist revival, is so important, is that that's really the starting point, if you like, of these series of revivals that gradually spread throughout the country. As you rightly say, it starts in Wales in the 1730s, and a little later they get to know people like John and Charles Wesley and George Whitefield, and they realize they're on the same sort of wavelength spiritually, you know, that they've all experienced something very similar in terms of the emphasis of these people was that they were all going to church before they were affected by this spiritual revival. But they all came to, and this is true of the Wesleys and Whitefield and Jonathan Edwards and other people in America as well. You know, you can all put it under the label of the Great Awakening, which happens in Wales, it happens in Scotland, it happens in England, it happens in continental Europe, and it happens in North America, around about the same time in the 1730s, more or less. And it's a phenomenon that it breaks out in all sorts of places, independent of each other. And that was true in Wales. This man, Howell Harris and Daniel Rowland, these two main leaders, these two young men, in different parts of South Wales, they didn't know each other, but they came to very similar spiritual experiences. And then about 2 years, they both came to this sort of spiritual experience, a spiritual revival, awakening in 1735. They met each other then 2 years later and realized, yes, we'd had the same type of experience. And then they start working together and evangelizing and telling other people that they need to be saved as well, that they need to come to a personal relationship with God, because that was the main emphasis. They all were already going to church. They all believed in their head, if you like, in the basics of the Christian faith. But what happened in these revivals is they were coming to a personal spiritual relationship with God. That is, that it wasn't enough to believe in your head, but you had to have heart experience as well. And that is the big emphasis you get in the revival. It's true of the Great Awakening in North America as well. There's great emphasis now on spiritual experience and coming to a personal relationship with God in Christ Jesus.
I have read the article you wrote about some important Christians of this Welsh revival. Is this of particular interest to you, or do you write about many other subjects?
I do write on other subjects, yes. I was teaching Welsh literature and Welsh culture generally in the university in Wales from the period of the Reformation through to present-day Wales. So yes, I deal with all sorts of aspects of Welsh life and literature and culture. I have a special interest, for example, in the 19th century. People set up a Welsh settlement in Patagonia in South America, where people still speak Welsh, a small community of Welsh speakers there. I've got an interest in their history. I've also got a particular interest in the abolition of slavery movement. And that again has got quite an interesting Welsh American aspect to it, because I'm sure you're be familiar with Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. And well, Harriet Beecher Stowe was of Welsh extraction. Her family came from South Wales. Actually, they came from the same village as Daniel Rowland in the 18th century was converted. There was a strong Welsh abolition movement in the mid 19th century especially in upper New York State, actually. And Harriet Beecher Stowe knew of her Welsh descent and was in contact with these people. And Uncle Tom's Cabin was, within a year, I think, of it being published in book form, it was published 3 times in Welsh. And one of those being printed in the States, for the Welsh community. So I got wider interest. I'm also quite interested in generally in popular poetry and ballads and folk songs. That is what is appealing to the common people of Wales. Their taste and interest, and my interest in hymns really dovetails into that, because hymns start in earnest in Welsh in the at the time of the early Methodist revival. Prior to that, most worship singing in Wales was psalms. But with the development of the Methodist movement and people wanting again to express their own personal faith, if you like, hymns start becoming very, very popular as expressions of faith. And as I say, that again is dovetails into my general interest in popular culture in Wales, if you like, in the 18th and 19th centuries.
Can you tell us more about the people we mentioned? Maybe starting with Daniel Rowland and Howell Harris. Did they know that they were starting a revival, or did it just happen?
Well, it just happened, really. Yes, they both came to a spiritual crisis, realizing that they weren't right with God, and one of them came to that sort of experience listening to someone else preaching, and then came to this sort of this conviction of sin, and then coming through that process of conviction of sin, then into a living faith, and that happened to him in this area where I said Harry Preacher Stowe's family came from in mid Wales, and then in another part of Wales about what would be about 30-40 miles away, the same sort of experience was happening in the case of Howell Harris. So yes, it wasn't something they planned at all. It was something that happened to them because, well, they would say, and I would say as a committed Christian, it was the work of the Holy Spirit convicting them of sin and then bringing them to faith in Christ. And then they really energized, if you like, to promote that faith, to tell other people about this faith that they'd come to, and that there was need for you to be a true Christian, to be the term that would be used by them and is still used by people today, of course, is born again Christian. To be a born again Christian, you need to be born again. You, as Christ himself says, you must be born again to become a child of God. And this is what they both came to, this experience. And they were both, Howell Harris was a very good organizer. And Daniel Rowland was an extremely powerful preacher. Indeed, and people would flock. You were talking earlier on about Mary Jones going to Bala. We'll probably come to Bala a little later on. But Daniel Rowland was, well, in the Anglican Church. He was a local priest in the Anglican Church in a small village called Llangeitho, which is right in the centre of Wales, more or less. And people would flock there to hear him from all parts of Wales. Thousands of people would come and travelling much more than 25 miles or 27 miles. Some of them would come on boat from the furthest part of North Wales and then walk over land to listen to him. And some people would regard him as being the most powerful preacher in the whole of Europe in that period. Preaching in Welsh, in that period. So between them, this movement develops and grows gradually. So yes, they didn't plan it, but they did plant a very powerful revival movement, which, as I say, eventually spread throughout the whole of Wales.
So your article also talks about Thomas Charles. He was an important preacher at that time and seemed to link all these people together. Can you tell us more about him?
Yes, well, Thomas Charles was a man from South Wales, and the Methodist revival in its early period was mainly based in South Wales. Wales is a very mountainous country, and the roads weren't very good at the time, so there wasn't that much contact, if you like, between North and South Wales in that period. And in that earlier period, the Methodist movement was mainly in South Wales, not exclusively, but mainly in South Wales. And this man, Thomas Charles, comes from South Wales. And he went to study in a college in South Wales, in a place called Carmarthen. And while he's at Carmarthen, he hears about this man Daniel Rowland being a very powerful preacher, and he walks again or goes quite a distance from Carmarthen up to this little village of Llangeitho to listen to this man, Daniel Rowland, preaching. That's in the year, if I remember rightly, 1773. Now, Daniel Rowland by then was, he was, as I say, when he first became a Christian, he was a young man in his early 20s. By this time now, he's a very established preacher. And Thomas Charles is a young man now going up to listen to him. So Thomas Charles is the second generation, if you like, of Methodists. Because in that, when he goes to hear Daniel Rowland preach in Llangeitho, he is really captivated by that sermon and regards it then as his conversion experience. And he says of that sermon, that it sort of grabbed him, if you like, and transformed him. And he says that although he knew about the Christian faith and believed of it in his head, if you like, prior to that, he said that it was such a transformative experience that he said that the wonders that were presented to me, the wonders of the glories of the gospel that were presented to me in that sermon, will live with me for eternity, he said. It really grasped his soul and it transforms him. He then goes as a student to Oxford University and becomes a priest in the Anglican Church. And for a little while goes to the south of England to be a priest in the Anglican Church there, but really wants to come back to Wales. To serve the Welsh people and to promote the revival in Wales, if you like. But what happens to him is that he'd heard about this remarkable young woman from North Wales in a town called Bala in the centre of North Wales, this very central position in North Wales. And a friend of his in Oxford, who was a fellow Methodist, came from Bala, and after he graduated, before he started his work as a priest in the Anglican Church in south of England, he was invited by his friend to go to Bala for a summer holiday before starting on his new job, and he really was, very anxious to accept the invitation, not only because he wanted to see North Wales and to stay with his friend in what was quite a big house in Bala, but he'd heard about this remarkable young woman in Bala called Sally Jones. And she was well known in Methodist circles. People are talking about her in Methodist circles as someone, the family kept a shop in Bala, and so she was quite well off financially, but she was a very beautiful girl. She was a very capable girl, and could run the shop very well as well, And she, as I say, became quite famous in Methodist circles in Wales. William Williams of Pantycelyn, who you mentioned, would have liked her to be his daughter-in-law. and he talks about her as being the flower of North Wales. Well, anyway, Thomas Charles had heard about her when he was a student and was very anxious to see her. And when he saw her, he fell in love with her on first sight. And he writes to her after going back and says to her in the first letter that he writes to her, he says that the ardor, the fire that was starting to burn in me after just hearing about you, really became a flame after seeing you and wanting to develop a relationship with her. And Sally was very, very dubious about it all at the very beginning. And her first letter back to him says, well, yes, I don't really want to keep on this correspondence with you. I think you're really after my money. But Thomas Charles carries on and carries on and carries on writing to her, and eventually wins her hand in marriage. But Sally was definite that she wasn't going to leave Bala. So if he wanted to marry her, he had to go and live in Bala. And that's what happened. And that's why we call him Thomas Charles of Bala in North Wales, or he actually was coming up there from South Wales. So it's really, one Welsh historian calls their marriage then, or one of the great love stories of Welsh history, he says. And it really transformed North Wales, because by going to Bala, Thomas Charles then carries on the work of spreading the gospel in North Wales, as people like Daniel Rowland and Howell Harris had done in South Wales. And the Christian gospel and the Methodist movement spread dramatically in North Wales under his leadership. He's central to North Wales. And then he builds around himself a group of preachers and teachers who he sends out then to all parts of North Wales. And one of the people that become affected by it is Mary Jones. She learns to read the Bible by one of Thomas Charles's teachers, visiting her area and teaching people to read the Bible. So it's really transformative in Welsh history. Thomas Charles is love story then is a turning point in not just in Christianity but in Welsh culture generally.
Okay, now a personal question for you. Do you have a favorite Welsh dish? If so, is it something William Williams would have eaten or Anne Griffith would have eaten?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. There are a lot of things I do like. One thing I do like particularly is what you would call a stew, I suppose, where you would have sort of lamb or beef usually mixed up with, boiled in a sort of soup, if you like, with vegetables, with potatoes and parsnips and carrots and so on and so forth. I do really enjoy that. I suspect that both William Williams Pantycelyn and Anne Griffiths would probably have eaten quite a lot of lamb. They were both living on farms, and in that period, I see Wales was a very rural and mountainous country, and there are a lot of sheep in Wales. And certainly both William Williams and Anne Griffiths would have kept sheep. So I suspect that the sheep would have been somewhere on their menu. William Williams also, he travelled the country preaching and shepherding the Methodist. The Methodists came together in little society meetings, what they call experience meetings, to discuss their faith and their spiritual experiences. And William Williams, like Howell Harris, would go around the country and visit these little groups and also evangelize and preach on his journeys. He travelled a lot on horseback throughout the whole of Wales. And he would sell his books, his books of hymns, etc., on the way. But he also sold tea. So I suspect he would have quite enjoyed a cup of tea in the afternoon, possibly with a Welsh cake, perhaps.
Last question. Can you teach us how to say goodbye in Welsh?
Yeah, well, I'll do my best. Yes. One popular form of saying goodbye is hwyl fawr. Hwyl fawr. Can you manage that?
Hwyl fawr?
Yeah, very good.
Okay.
Yes, hwyl fawr. Hwyl literally means a sail. The word can also mean have fun as well. We use it in Welsh. It literally means a sail of a ship, if you like. And mawr means big or great. So it's really telling you have a fair sailing, if you like. Have a good journey, have a good time. So hwyl fawr. Another possibility would be da boch. That's a little bit more formal. Da boch. And Welsh has got this sound. Can you manage that, I wonder? Da boch.
Da boch. Like that?
Yes, very good. Yes, da boch. Da, the word da means good. And boch there means be with you. So good be with you, it means. So da boch, good be with you.
All right. Dr. James, we are so thankful that you decided to spend this time with us. And listeners, keep telling us what you think of these episodes and keep asking questions. We'll pass them on to our guest experts as soon as possible. And we are having a giveaway for Dr. James' book, A Flame in the Mountains, in ebook format. As we said, it is not written for children, but we think families can still use it. So make sure you enter to win this book by filling out the form on our website, kidstalkchurchhistory.org. In partnership with the Alliance of Confessing Evangelicals, and on behalf of my co-hosts, Grace and Sean, I am Trinity. Thank you so much for listening to Kids Talk Church History.